I'd like to welcome everybody to the call today. I want to give you lots of resources, ideas, PowerPoints you can use, everything you're going to need to go out and train your frontline staff about BSA, Bank Secrecy Act, anti-money laundering, so that you can be the expert at your institution and be the frontline person. So with that said, let's look at one of my favorite resources. This is a book from 2004, Crime School Money Laundering. It was written by Chris Mathers. He was an undercover money launderer for the FBI and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So you can still buy this on Amazon for $10 to $15. It's one of the best books that just outlines basic money laundering, give you a lot of good ideas, a lot of good training ideas that you could use with your institution. So that's first and foremost the best resource for getting ideas on training your staff. Next is my favorite movie on money laundering, Blow. Comes from 2001 with Johnny Depp, Penelope Cruz. The reason I like it is because it starts in 1968 and CTRs were started in 1970 because drug dealers were bringing in trash bags full of cash. And instead of ordering money from the Federal Reserve, they were sending money back to the Federal Reserve. And I thought, holy mackerel, what is going on in the marketplace that banks don't have to order money? Where are people getting all this cash? And so they thought, gosh, we need to start monitoring all of this cash coming in through the banks. And that's when the currency transaction report started in 1970. This is a great question for your new staff. How much was a CTR in 1970? When they started that form, what do you think the dollar amount or dollar limit was to file a CTR? The answer is it's never been changed or indexed for inflation. It was $10,000 in 1970. It's $10,000 today. So you have to go over $10,000. It starts at $10,000 and a penny. So if somebody brings $10,000 even in, you do not file a currency transaction report. Anyway, this is a great movie. It's got some great lines in it about money laundering. Of course, by now there are lots of movies and TV shows on all kinds of corruption, The Wolf of Wall Street, Dirty Money on Netflix, Ozark, Narcos, Breaking Bad. My wife is a chemistry major. I work in anti-money laundering, so of course Breaking Bad and Ozarks were right up our alley. They were actually kind of slow for us. We're like, come on, this has got to get going a whole lot quicker. So you don't have to look very far to find movies that depict corruption. And I saw a presentation by a Homeland Security officer and an FBI officer who worked on the actual Narcos, and they said about a third of it is true, a third of it is exaggerated, and a third of it never happened. So there you go. When you talk money laundering to your institution, you want to make sure you get across placement, layering, and integration. And when you see in the top left-hand corner the collection of dirty money, that could be money that was earned legitimately, but now they're trying to hide it from the government so they don't have to pay taxes on it. So it could be legit money, but now they're trying to blur the paper trail, so they're going to be a tax evasion. And so they have to place that money into the bank and then layer that with clean money so that they can purchase goods and services. But those are the three words you want to make sure you get into a presentation: placement, layering, and integration. Also, when you're filing suspicious activity reports, you want to try and use those same words. This is a case of placement and layering, or this is a case for layering and integration, what have you. You don't have to go very far. I live in a small town outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and this was a case up near Athens, Georgia, where the Oconee County Sheriff's Office confiscated 70 pounds of marijuana that was coming in through, I think it was Federal Express or UPS. Came in just an airtight shipping container, and it's valued at $5,000 per pound, so $350,000 coming into a nail salon. And this was just a month and a half ago. So I've got some older slides in here, but want you to know it's still just as legit today as ever. This was a drug bust that netted 65 kilos of cocaine. A kilo is 2.2 pounds. So 65 kilos of cocaine, 7 kilos of heroin at a truck stop. Now, I live in such a small town, we get a weekly paper, but we're on an interstate. So even in this small little town with a weekly paper, we still see drug busts like this going on today. So it doesn't take a lot of effort to find some current drug cases in your local area. If you feel like you need some practice on your public speaking, I would encourage you to join Toastmasters. You can find the information at toastmasters.org. It's where you practice public speaking. You get a training manuals of skills. You can pick any topic you want to speak on, but they're going to teach you the different skills. And it's going to run about $30 every 6 months. You can join more than one club at a time. They usually have a weekly meeting for an hour. They'll have 2 speakers give a 5 to 7 minute speech. They'll have 2 reviews, one each of the speech that generally run 2 to 3 minutes each. And then they have table topics where you get to practice your impromptu speaking for 45 seconds to a minute and a half. So a lot of practice, and I call it a laboratory. And the nice thing about it is these people are all there trying to improve their public speaking skills. So I used to tell people, it's a laboratory where you get to practice your public speaking skills in front of people that don't matter, because it's not your boss, it's not your peers. You are there strictly to improve your public speaking skills. So it doesn't matter what you say, it only matters how you say it. I have given plenty of reviews from engineers who were speaking on very technical topics, which was way over my head. But my role and goal was to be their reviewer and tell them how they presented, not how accurately they presented the material. So a great resource for public speaking. They'll count your odds and ums and help you get over any other issues you may have in public speaking. And I was a member of multiple clubs for about 5 years. So I'm a big proponent of Toastmasters. USA Patriot Act, and you can Google any of these. The handbook on BSA, Bankers Online is an excellent resource for questions and answers. If you want to get your ACAMS, which is the Association for Certified Anti-Money Laundering Specialists, their website is acams.org. That is the premier organization for recognizing folks who have gone out and achieved additional training. This was started after 9/11. When I got my certification in 2005, there were about 800 in the world. There were 8 in the state of Georgia. And today there's probably over 70,000 worldwide, and they have national conferences and trade shows. So ACAMS, if you plan to stay in the industry a long time and would like to advance and have some designation for your additional training. If you work at a bank or credit union, you should already be established on the FinCEN email list. So you can go out to fincen.gov and establish yourself, and they will have to document that you work at the institution you say you do. You can look at the history of FinCEN. FinCEN is the Financial Crime Enforcement Network, where we upload all of our suspicious activity reports and currency transaction reports. If your bank or credit union is looking to get some additional computer software, maybe you're looking at Banker's Toolbox or Global Vision or Verifin or Yellowhammer or something from one of your primary core providers, there's a great publication out there on computer software due diligence and how to go about performing due diligence for your brand and type of software. Number 8, the non-cooperative countries and territories, the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, has a list of those, and your Treasury Department updates, and the FinCEN SARS and reviews. So this FinCEN SARS and reviews is available to the public. You go out to fincen.gov, and you want to look under their publications. You'll see up there in the newsroom on the top blue bar, newsroom, and then reports and publications. And you'll see a lot of good law enforcement cases. Here's 3 that I picked out. Bank Secrecy Act records detailed transactions related to illicit smoke shop sales. I love this one. A judge sentenced the owners of a tribal tobacco shop to probation and community service, and they had to pay $10 million in restitution. BSA document analysis helpful in a fraud case. And in the third one, it helped jury convict a cocaine trafficker. So for all of you out there who think you're filing all of these suspicious activity reports and nobody's ever paying attention, well, they are paying attention, and they do help convict criminals. Your ABA, American Bankers Association, educational opportunities, Bankers Online link to the National Bankers Associations, etc. All right, you want to do some annual face-to-face training. You can do this, you could go out and buy a webinar and show it to your folks, but I would encourage you to be the expert at your institution. So I want you to go out and do the face-to-face training. So this is kind of a train the trainers kind of class that we're having right now. So when you do your face-to-face training, I would encourage you to get your employee list from Human Resources by branch. And then as you go out to the branches, have each person sign and date next to their name. That way you can document each person who got their training and keep up with who's missing. Maybe you want to outsource this to the branch managers. If you've got 20 branches, maybe you don't have time to go to all of them. If you've only got 3 or 4, you probably want to be the one who goes out to those 3 or 4 branches. So maybe you need to have a train the trainers class with your branch managers. Or maybe you record it or have a session if you have a Skype or some sort of program where you can record this and they can show it at their branches before work. When I was a BSA officer, I did it at the same time each year. I did it at the end of 4th quarter between, generally kind of between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Those were generally slow weeks for us in lending areas, so things were kind of slow in the bank in the first place. Your tellers are obviously going to be swamped the day after Thanksgiving usually, but depending on the time in your area. Pick when it's convenient that you can get folks in, 30 or 45 minutes before the bank opens or 30 to 45 minutes after the bank closes, and you can do some annual face-to-face training. I used to do it in the morning. I'd take donuts. It's amazing how people are going to show up for donuts, so don't forget the donuts. But you want to document that each person attended. When you had new employees, you want to work with your human resources department. On the very first day of work, people would come in, they would get their checking account, they would sign up for insurance, and the third thing they would do is go see the BSA officer. So I would just take them through a 5 or 10 minute PowerPoint. I'd have them sign for the handout slides. I would explain the how, what, and why to the new bankers, and then try and set a 20-minute follow-up discussion if they've never worked in a bank before. And primarily, I just want to explain to them currency transaction reports, why we fill them out. And because it started with the drug trade in the 60s, and people are trying to avoid paying taxes and they're bringing in cash, then we want to document the currency. If somebody brings in a check for 20 grand, we don't care about checks. Checks already have a paper trail. It's just the cash, the currency money that we're looking for. And we can fill out those in front of people, right in front of their face. We can ask them questions. But a suspicious activity report, we do that behind their back. It's classified. We never let the customer know that we're doing it. And even as the BSA officer, I generally wouldn't even tell my frontline staff if I took their employee referral and turned it into a suspicious activity report. If they would follow up with me and say, hey, Doug, did you ever file a SAR on that person I gave you last week? I don't know. I'd have to check. I look at so many names on a daily basis, I can't keep up with them. Even though I full well knew that I did file a SAR on them, I'm never going to let the tellers in on whether I filed one or not. When you're talking to your frontline staff and they're opening new accounts, and now we've got this enhanced due diligence, fifth pillar on the BSA program, we want to teach our frontline staff how to have a conversation and not an interrogation. In other words, if somebody comes in, they want to open a new business account, hey, thanks for opening your account. Let me help you get the most out of your time here. Tell me what types of services you've used in the past. DDAs, a demand deposit account, a checking account, certificate of deposit, safe deposit, night deposit wires, online bill pay. I mean, tell me what you've used in the past so I can help you get the most out of your relationship with us. Do you expect to send wires? Would you like to meet somebody from the wire department? Do we need to go through our wire procedures and give you wiring instructions that you can give your suppliers or vendors on how they're going to be paying you if you require wires? So that's a great way to open up the conversation with them. If they say, well, I've been a landscaper, well, that's great. How'd you get into that line of work? Did your mom or dad teach you the business, or did you start it your own? How long you been at it? That kind of stuff. So that's interesting. How did you get into that line of work? And just have a conversation. You don't have to interrogate them on what do you expect to do? How much cash are you going to bring in? How much wires are you going to bring in? So just tone it down a little bit, and you'd be surprised what people will voluntarily tell you when you don't have to interrogate them. Did your parents teach you that business, or did you buy the business? Who else will have access to the account? Are you going to have a payroll account? Are you going to have people coming in and cashing on us checks? So are you going to write payroll on Friday, and your employees are going to come in Friday at lunchtime and cash all those payroll checks? Can we open accounts for them and they can simply deposit those checks, or are we going to be expected to cash out all these payroll checks? Already went through the wiring instructions. Would you like to meet a loan officer? You know, if you're currently in a building or you need to buy some new equipment down the road, you may need a loan for that. Can I introduce you to a loan officer so you'll at least have some relationship when you come back 6 months, a year, 2 years from now and want to inquire about getting a loan? Now, I want to give you some very specific BSA training because that's what your BSA exam is going to require, is that you have job-specific BSA training. So this is going to be for your board of directors. This is going to be the shortest one, and then as we go throughout the bank, we're simply going to take this same presentation and add more slides to it. So this is for our board of directors. Their question is always, well, why are the examiners so mean and why are they up in arms? Of course, we just had an anniversary for 9/11, so everybody is very familiar about the terrorist aspect of money laundering. Excuse me, but if they've been filing CTR since 1970, what's the big deal? Well, in 2004, there was a memo of understanding by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, and the National Credit Union Administration. And this was handed down by the Justice Department saying, you guys need to clean up and tighten up money laundering in the banks and the credit unions, or we're going to take away that part of your exam process and start our own agencies. And I'll never forget this day because the Federal Reserve was in my bank doing the BSA exam, and I just couldn't help myself, but I went to my examiner in charge and said, one of us is under an MOU, and it's not me. So he hadn't heard of it yet, but I remember when that story first broke years ago. We are currently in the process of drafting detailed guidance to banks on sound corporate governance process to incorporate many of the concepts, including business line accountability and the independence of the compliance function. This is in March of 2013, Comptroller of the Currency. So this is not going away, is the point I'm trying to make here. When you talk to your folks about money laundering, the first question you usually get is, well, what is it? And money laundering in its simplest terms is just tax evasion. That's the easiest way to describe it, is just tax evasion. So what is, or how serious is tax evasion? Well, there was an article 14 years ago, an American banker that estimates that it's between $600 billion and $1.5 trillion a year. Well, that's just an estimate because it's tax evasion. We don't know. So if you try and comprehend what $1 trillion looks like, you take a year, 365 days, you back out the weekend days, you got 261 work days a year. The Atlanta Braves used to play in a stadium that held 40,000 people. If you filled that stadium with money launderers each working day, they would be laundering $95,000 per person per day. So you want to use an example that will be equivalent in your market. So I used the Atlanta Braves because most people in the bank had been to a Braves game. They could visualize what 40,000 people would look like and how big of a stadium it would take to hold 40,000 people. So they can't comprehend $1 trillion, but they can comprehend 40,000 people, and they can comprehend $95,000 per day for 261 work days a year. So you just break it down into bite-sized chunks that they can comprehend, and it will make sense to them. Here's an article from March of 2013. It's considered a white-collar crime and often a victimless crime, but what makes it a dangerous crime are the preceding acts: the human trafficking, the kidnappings, killings, pimping, theft, scams, terrorism, arms trafficking, and bribery, among others. According to the International Monetary Fund, the total amount of funds laundered in the world varies between 2% and 5% of the global gross domestic product, because resources from illicit origin can be easily and immediately transferred from one jurisdiction to another. Just in Mexico alone, the Ministry of Treasury and Finance calculates $1 trillion every year are laundered in the country. Well, that's in Mexico in March of 2013. So in America, you can imagine it is some multiple of that. But again, I just did it for $1 trillion. So if you wanted to find an article that said it was $2, $3, or $4 trillion, you could simply take that $95,000 times 2, 3, or 4. Depending on the article you read, it's currently estimated that there are between 27 million and 40 million people in slavery today. That is throughout the globe. So generally women are trafficked for sex and men are trafficked for labor, generally. And again, between 27 and 40 million people. It's estimated there are more people in slavery today than at any time in history. So when you talk about human trafficking, this is what we're talking about. Now, money laundering, where did the name come from? Well, it comes from 1930s Chicago. And when you talk about 1930s Chicago, you kind of got to set the stage. People didn't live so much in single-family residences as they did in apartment buildings. Those apartment buildings didn't have bathrooms in every unit. They had a bathroom at the end of the hall. They didn't have laundry rooms in each unit. They had laundromats. Now, 1930s Chicago, we've got Prohibition. So, during Prohibition in the 1930s in Chicago, who owned more than 300 laundromats? Al Capone. It was speculated that Al also had or was making some illicit liquor. He maybe been involved in prostitution, blackmail, extortion. He had multiple streams of income. And what they ended up arresting him for was tax evasion. So if his laundromats, and he had 300 laundromats, and let's just pick a number out of the air. If his laundromats were doing $1 million in sales for the year, he deposited $2 million in cash at the banks. And so that's what they finally arrested him on, was tax evasion. So what the records of his laundromat said he didn't match the amount of money that he deposited in his accounts. So he ran the money through his laundromats, and that's where we get the term money laundering. He made the dirty money appear clean. And that was simply placement and layering of the 3 steps. If you're trying to look for a quick little snippet, maybe you only get 5 minutes at your board of directors meeting and you've got to show them something in 5 minutes, then go out to YouTube, type in Breaking Bad money laundering, and look for this 1 minute and 41-second clip on Breaking Bad, the money laundering process. He describes that better than most day-long conferences that I have been to. And so now that you have found that gold of 1 minute and 41 seconds describing money laundering, you can download that. You can download any YouTube file just by adding the SS after www, and it'll download it and save it to your computer so you can put it on your desktop, walk into the board of directors meeting, plug your computer up to the projector, and show this for 1 minute and 41 seconds. So there's our buddy Saul explaining money laundering and some of the different ways you may find it and be able to download the links. The Bank Secrecy Act of 1970 was brought about because of the drug trade of the 60s. They were bringing grocery bags of cash into the banks. That's when we started with the currency transaction report. The threshold has never been indexed for inflation. I read an article last week, it would be over $60,000 today if they had indexed that for inflation. We have 5 pillars of the Bank Secrecy Act. We have to have a board-appointed BSA officer annually. We have to have a Bank Secrecy Act policy. We have to have training annually. We have to have a system of internal controls. Now, when you think of what's a system of internal controls and what would it look like if it was sitting on my desk? Well, a system of internal controls is nothing more than a checklist. So don't get caught up in what's a system of internal control. It's just checklists. So how do we make sure that these checklists get completed? Do we have a monthly compliance meeting where we go through these different checklists and make sure that we've done them all so that things don't slip through the cracks? And then the 5th pillar of BSA is our customer due diligence, and we talked briefly about that before. So how does this affect us? Well, like it or not, bankers are the gatekeepers at the nation's financial borders. Instead of big seizures of cash, the USA Patriot Act has led to books and records that help identify, locate, and capture the bad guys and uncover terrorist plots. Now, this goes back to 2002, so this is 16 years old. So this is not anything revolutionary or new that's just come about. These things have been on the books for years, and your bank or credit union is fully expected to comply. This was a slide, part of the testimony of Stephen Emerson, February of 2002, to the House Committee on Financial Services, Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations. So any place you see an American flag, they had an American presence. So when you look at some of these charities, Human Concern International, International Islamic Relief Organization, Human Rights Organizations, Committee for the Defense of Legitimate Rights, some of these sound very legit, that people could be donating money to these thinking they are helping these type of charities or human rights organizations, when in fact they were actually funding money through to the terrorists. The Office of Foreign Asset Control was started in 1950. So it started 20 years before currency transaction reports. OFAC is simply don't do business with the enemy. That's pretty straightforward. And so when you're doing your screening for names and businesses and sanctions, you want to, or should I say, you are working with an agency that was started in 1950. It's interesting when you work with your larger banks and somebody is having a wire stopped because their name is suspect on an OFAC list. Well, they think you're OFAC and you ought to be able to just approve that and send the wire through. Well, no, we have to get this from Washington, D.C., get it approved before we can release those funds. If you ever read the OFAC laws, in a great summary of that is, thou shalt not do nothing without checking OFAC. And that means when you go to the ballpark and you pay $3 for a hot dog, you're supposed to run that vendor's name through OFAC before you give them money. And they're supposed to run your name through OFAC before they take your money. So that's the letter of the law. Not obviously going to be followed to the letter of the law, but the whole idea for banks is if you're going to open a new account, if you're going to send or receive a wire for somebody, check to make sure they're not on the OFAC list. If you have a nightly scrub, if you have some sort of a scrub before you open the accounts, and then if you do a weekly, monthly scrub against your whole database, be diligent on that. Your 314A list comes out every other Tuesday. Those are people who have interest to FinCEN. They're not necessarily going to be indicted yet, but they are simply of interest. And so you've got 2 weeks to get back to FinCEN if you've done any business with them. Is this only about terrorists? No, it's about tax evasion, the Al Capones of the world. When we talk about money laundering, there are 3 stages: our placement, our layering, and our integration. And I've put the YouTube link up there for your Breaking Bad money process. But you want to go through, again, depending on how much time you get with your board of directors, on how much time you can go into your placement, layering, and integration. But somehow we got to get the money in the bank. Are we going to do that by going out and buying money orders from a bunch of different places and having them deposit the money? Are we going to have bank accounts at 10 different institutions and then have a funnel account where we push all the money to one account before we send it back to wherever it needs to go? So how are we going to get the money into the bank, and then how are we going to layer it so we can hide the source or destination of the funds? And then integration, we're going to combine the illegitimate with the legitimate funds so that we can buy goods and services. Our currency transaction report, I get a kick. People think this is anytime you bring 20 grand. Like if I have a check, like I sold a car or a motorhome or a boat, and they gave me a check for 30 grand, isn't the bank going to want to know what happened? I said, no, that's a check that already has a paper trail. Just take it in and deposit. If you want to take your bill of sale with you, that's probably not a bad idea. But, and there's nothing illegal about taking $30,000 of cash into a bank. I had a friend of mine who sold his Corvette, and the guy who bought it drove 2 hours away to come pick it up, and he had told him ahead of time, I'm going to bring cash because I want to leave with the title, and I don't want, you know, you to wait 2 or 3 days for my check to clear. We're going to take cash. We'll take it up to the bank. We'll have them count it, make sure none of it's counterfeit. You can deposit it right into your account. And so that's what they did. So he called me and said, is this what I should do? I said, yes. You've got a bill of sale. You've got a legit reason why you're getting that much cash. You've done nothing wrong. So just go deposit the money. You've done nothing wrong. So deposit withdrawals, transfers. Banks file 15 million CTRs annually. I get a kick out of talking to frontline staff at banks who the folks come in and say, well, I don't want the government to know what I'm doing, which is funny because they're being monitored from the time that they say, I want to open an account. We are tracking, monitoring, we're pulling credit reports in some cases, we're pulling background checks, we're doing check systems, we're doing an OFAC check. If they have suspicious activity, your bank or credit union's going to file a suspicious activity report, so they're being monitored. They're on video cameras, so they're already being well monitored. So if somebody says, I don't want the government to see what I'm doing, say, don't worry about it. The government files 15 million of these a year. So if you've got a legit reason why you've got this, maybe you're in a cash-intensive business, or you are liquidating an estate for your parents and you're selling, I don't know, cars, china, artwork, whatever, and as you get the money in, you're making deposits, and you could be making deposits of $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, and it looks like you're structuring those deposits when, in fact, you're just bringing the cash in as you get it. So let them know it's okay to file a CTR. You're not going to have the Treasury Department or the FBI on your front doorstep the next day. They've got far too many of those to worry about. When we have CTRs, it has to be multiple, if it's multiple currency transactions, it has to be on the same business day, by or on behalf of the same person, and the bank or credit union has to have knowledge. In other words, if I was a business owner and two of my neighbors were business owners and we were going to play golf one day, and I said, I got to swing by the bank and put my cash deposit from last night in the night drop box. And they said, well, here, take ours. We'll go to the golf course. We'll get some breakfast for you on the way. We'll get you signed in, checked in. We'll meet you on the range. Fine. So if I go through and I drop 3 of these night drop box or 3 of these cash envelopes in the night drop box, the bank would not have knowledge that that was done by one person. However, if I went by the teller, the drive-through teller window and said, hey, I'm dropping off this one for me and these 2 are for my neighbors, then that's all being done by the same person on the same day, and they had knowledge of it. So even though it was for 3 different businesses, it was being done on the same business day by the same person, and the bank had knowledge of it. So in that case, they would file a currency transaction report aggregating all 3 of those businesses on behalf of the person who made the deposits. Our suspicious activity reports, or as we say in South Georgia, it's a something ain't right report. These are done behind the customer's backs. We don't ever tell the customer that we're filing a suspicious activity report. This is classified. The banks have a safe harbor, meaning that when we file these, we can't get subpoenaed for them. That's the only way the system works, is we have to be able to have freedom of speech in what we say without it coming back up in court after someone gets arrested. The 4 limits and situations, there's no dollar minimum on insider abuse. A lot of your big embezzlement scams start with a couple of tellers or a teller or someone else starting with $100 or $50. I just needed to borrow a little bit of money till I could pay it back, and things snowballed. Or I started with a fraudulent loan for $1,000, and then I started doing $4,000 and then $10,000, and pretty soon they have defrauded the bank out of $1 million. So if it's insider abuse, there's no limit. $5,000 criminal suspicious activity, and we have a suspect, versus $25,000, we have no suspect. What is that? When would that situation come up? That's when we have elder abuse. We've got grandma sending money to her new boyfriend in Vietnam, Hong Kong, whatever third world country she is wiring money to, because her new good friend just needs a little bit of help to get back on their feet. And when we try and track down this wire, all we have is an account number. We don't have a person's name. We don't know who it's going to. And so we really don't have a suspect. We have a victim, but we can't tell you what person's name we're going after. So if it's $25,000 and we have no suspect, it's just gone, we want to file a SAR on that. And then the $5,000 pure BSA violation, structuring, etc. Our legal definitions: transactions illegal. It's designed to evade the reporting requirements of BSA, such as structuring, or it's inconsistent with the customer's normal behavior. Now, if somebody sells a $9,000 car one time during the year, that's not structuring, because they're not selling cars every week or every month. They sold one car for $9,000. That's a spike in activity. That's not a pattern. That's not a new trend. It may be unusual for that customer's normal behavior, but it can be explained. that person brought in a bill of sale, I know them, whatever, and they sold the car and they haven't had any large cash transactions before that or after that. So now we're going to do some training for loan officers. So we're going to take that PowerPoint that we just gave our board of directors and we're going to add these slides to it. So loan officers are the most difficult ones to train in the bank because they think BSA doesn't apply to them. They think that is for deposit side operations, they are on loan side, and this doesn't apply to them at all. And so we want to be able to describe some case studies, some scenarios on how people can launder money with loans, and this is the easiest way. Is people bring in cash deposits over weeks, months, years, and let's say they bring in 25, 50, 100 grand, whatever dollar amount. They're going to buy a CD. They're going to use that CD for collateral on a loan, and then they make the loan payments in cash. In this scenario, they just laundered money twice. So they were bringing in the cash for the initial purchase of the CD. And then they get a certified check from the loan officer that they can go spend any way they like, and then they're going to make their payments in cash. So cash came in twice. Somebody could also get a home loan or a business loan. If they qualify with their current job and tax returns, they could make the payments with cash. If you've got an equity line or a commercial line of credit, you could qualify with your current job and tax returns. The proceeds could be used for illegal activity. Watch who the checks are being written out to, and then transfer money in from other banks to pay them down. So you find out there's a funnel account involved, or they're making payments with cash. So there's a variety of ways to watch before and after of what people are doing with the money and how they're doing it to determine if this is a suspicious or something ain't right type of report. But it's certainly possible to use the loan department and loan proceeds to launder money. Now when we get up to our teller line and our customer service people, we're going to take that board of directors presentation, we're going to add on the loan officers, and now we're going to add these few slides to it as well. So some random ideas for our frontline staff. You as the BSA officer want to delegate some of this research. When you have a weekly paper, and I'm not talking about in the Atlanta Journal when you've got your daily big thick newspaper, the Atlanta Journal Constitution, you're just looking for your small weeklies that are going to have your crime statistics or the crime roll inside of it. And so you want to scan your database for your local drug dealers, fraudsters, prostitutes, and others, and you can turn those results into the BSA officer so that when you do or when you have your exam with whatever agency you're regulated by, then after you turn in all the required documents, you could hand them this and say, this is the information you didn't ask for. These are all the additional folks that we scrubbed against our database looking for unusual activity. 50% of all suspicious activity reports are for structuring. And the number one occupation for structuring, and nobody ever gets this right, the number one occupation for structuring is housewife. So in this case, she is going to be on the account by herself on purpose because they don't want the business owner on the account. That's too obvious. Could be a doctor, a dentist, a lawyer, could be any sort of contractor. When I had 7 rental houses and I had some contractors out to my personal home doing work, I would ask them, hey, just out of curiosity, what all kind of work do you do? Because I have 7 rental houses. And without fail, they would say, well, just make that check payable to me personally, and I'll give you an invoice for one of your rental houses that says I did some work over there. So they were, I mean, I didn't even ask them to launder money. I was just trying to find out what they did for a living and what services I could use them for going forward. So in this case, when you've got a housewife who's bringing in cash, you want to do some research, look up her address, go to your tax records at your county, which is all available on a Google search, and find out where she lives, who she lives with, who she's married to, and what kind of work they do, and that'll probably answer most all your questions right there. Probably on the account by herself, probably married to a contractor, plastic surgeon, somebody gets paid in cash, time to do some research. Some suspicious activity or questions you may get in the front line. Do you pull credit reports for CDs? This came about because I worked with a bank one time and we would pull credit reports when somebody opened a checking or savings account because we wanted to see what kind of history they had. But if they were coming in to open a CD, we may not necessarily pull a credit report. If, you know, grandma's coming in to get a $50,000 CD, what's the point in pulling a credit report? Well, if somebody says you pull credit reports for CDs, they're looking for a way to get in the door. So if they've got bad credit, but they open a CD, now maybe they can get a safe deposit box, and now they can get their foot in the door. And then 6 months later, they get a savings account. And then 6 months later, they get a checking account. But because they've been a customer for a year, you're not going to pull a credit report or a check systems report. Come to find out, they are going to use kiting or other fraud at your institution and, you know, end up owing you $100,000 because they defrauded the bank. So that's kind of an initial tipping point or an initial question to pull credit reports for CDs. Do they access the safe deposit box before deposits, meaning that's where they keep all their cash, and so they go in, pull the cash out of the safe deposit box, put it into their checking account, and pay bills from there. How frequent of safe deposit box activity do they have? If they openly ask about CTR limitations, that's pretty obvious. If they're on the phone while making transactions, I talked to a BSA officer years ago. Woman was in constantly talking to her husband on the phone. Is this what you want? Am I doing it right? Is this the type of transaction you want? And come to find out, he couldn't be on the account because he had already been indicted on 17 counts of smuggling illegal aliens to work at his 3 gas stations, et cetera, et cetera. If folks are bringing in cash denominations the wrong way, normally folks bring in 50s and 100s and they want 1s, 5s, and 10s. But if they're bringing in 1s, 5s, and 10s and they want 50s and 100s, that means they're trying to make it easier to take back across the border so that they can package it in smaller bundles and take it across the borders. Car loan payoffs in cash. I have had some payoffs in cash because they wanted to leave with the title. And so when I asked the guy, where did you get the $17,000 to pay off the car that you're getting from my customer? He said, well, I got it out of my Bank of America account, and here's my receipt. That's fabulous. Thank you. So I had the receipt. Even though we did fill out a currency transaction report, we did not fill out a suspicious activity report because we had proof of funds of where the money came from. Do you let people in your bank or credit union wearing sunglasses and hats? I have seen signs by the front door that says, take off your glasses and hats before you walk in here. Also, Do you let people in around Halloween with costumes on? And what kind of costumes? And do you have to recognize them and know who they are before you let them in the door? These are just some random ideas that you can add in for your presentation: the difference in cocaine and meth, the difference in blackmail and extortion, where the term money laundering comes from. I've covered that in detail. The difference in cocaine and meth: a buzz off coke lasts about 20 minutes. A buzz off meth lasts hours. Meth is all synthetics. Cocaine is a natural product, although they cut it with junk to get it down to 10% purity so they can pump the price of it on the street. The difference in blackmail and extortion is evidence. So blackmail is you pay me $5,000 or I will show pictures of you doing something, or I have evidence that you did something. So we have evidence. That's blackmail. Extortion is you didn't do anything wrong. You just happen to open a business in my part of town, and I'm going to offer some protection to make sure that your business maybe doesn't get broken into or burned down. So you haven't done anything wrong. They're just trying to extort money out of you. And we've covered where the money laundering comes from. All right. If you wanted to launder $2 million in 20s, how would you do it? Well, first of all, how much would it weigh? It would weigh 220 pounds. So I picked those numbers on purpose. $2 million in 20s weighs 220 pounds. If I was going to be a money launderer, I would be a painter. I would have cash deposits in many banks. I would tell you that when I finish a job and they write me a check, I go cash the check at the bank it was written on because I can't afford to have bounced checks. I pay off my suppliers and vendors and my employees in cash. And so I'm going to be bringing in cash deposits. I'm going to pay my vendors with checks drawn on this bank, but I'm bringing you cash deposits. Cash deposits to my checking account, buy a CD, use the CD as collateral on a loan, make loan payments in cash. Equity lines, I covered that in more detail previously. I'm going to buy companies that are already CTR exempt. If you have a convenience store or some other cash-intensive business, then you are CTR exempt. I'm going to pay full price for your business. I'm going to want you to stay on the bank account for 5 years, but I'm going to take that account from maybe $100,000 a month in cash to $200,000 a month in cash. And so it's going to make it look like I've just improved the efficiencies and the sales at this cash-intensive business when in effect, all I'm doing is laundering money. All right, with that, I have reached the end of my time, so I'm going to open it up for questions. I appreciate everybody coming today. Let me open up the chat box, and if you want to type in questions, you can certainly do that.